Everything we do at Hillsdale College is guided by the founding documents of the college, written in the 1840s and 1850s at a time of growing crisis in the country. The founders of Hillsdale College were grateful to God for the inestimable blessings of civil and religious liberty and intelligent piety in the land. And they created the college to promulgate and protect those blessings. Today we are faced with a new crisis, but we can learn from our founders' example. With gratitude to God for the liberty we have left, we stand now firmly in opposition to the administrative state that seeks to wield power, all the powers of government, and change human nature. This regime also seeks, as we have seen in the last few weeks, to punish its opponents and sweep away any semblance of American republicanism or Western classical thought. Now, they say, we are to move forward with historical progress, be good global citizens, and accept the decisions of our ruling elites. At a time when our rights have been openly abrogated in the name of public health, it is important to figure out what is truly dangerous and what is not. Hence, this evening, we are delighted to hear from an expert on the subject of the current administration's turn to bad foreign policy, which could further endanger our rights as American citizens. But expertise is not good enough, as we know. In fact, as many of you here know, expertise can be a hindrance to good education and good thinking in general. He who seeks to educate his fellow citizens properly must also be prudent and wise. Our speaker tonight possesses such virtues. Michael Doran is a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, where he specializes in Middle East security issues. He received his BA from Stanford University and his MA and PhD from Princeton University. I think that's the second and third best colleges behind Hillsdale in the land now. They're moving down on the list every day. So, he's also a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, where, there's copied twice there. He also served in the George W. Bush administration as a senior director in the National Security Council with responsibility for the entire Middle East except Iraq. A former senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, Dr. Doran has taught at NYU, Princeton, and the University of Central Florida. He has written for numerous publications, including the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the New York Post, USA Today, and the Los Angeles Times. He's the author of 3 books, including Pan-Arabism Before Nasser, Egyptian Power Politics and the Palestinian Question, and Ike's Gamble, America's Rise to Dominance in the Middle East. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Doran.
Well, thanks to all of you for coming, and thanks, Matt, for that introduction. I spoke, when was it, last year, I guess, at Hillsdale, and I forgot how much I appreciated Matt's ironic sense of humor. But then Matt also said that, I think you said that I'm possessed of prudence and wisdom, but remember, he's also very ironic. So anyway, it's a great pleasure to be here. Oh, look at that. It bounces. Do you see that? It's kind of cool. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I'm going to talk to you about the Biden administration's Iran policy. Let me start out by just saying that we all know we live in a polarized age right now in our politics, and increasingly our foreign policy debate is becoming part of our domestic debate. In fact, the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, said just a few months ago that we live in an age when domestic politics is foreign policy and foreign policy is domestic politics. I think that's true in general, but it's especially true with regard to the Iran question. And that's true for a lot of reasons, but one reason is that the Iran question is very much tied to the Israel question, and as we all know, Israel has become a very partisan issue in our politics. And there are now, I think, 2 pretty clear conceptions about how to deal with Iran, and I'm going to call them, for the sake of discussion, the Democratic position and the Republican position. But that's it's a little bit crude, because if you look at this closely, or if you follow it closely the way I have, you know that there are actually a fair number of Republican foreign policy experts that are actually very sympathetic to the Democratic, what I'm calling the Democratic conception, and even a few Democrats who are more sympathetic to the Republican view. But the center of gravity on either side pulls them apart. So I think it makes sense. It's sort of ideal types to say Democratic and Republican. Let me start with the Republican view. Actually, before I do that, let me just say there is a continuity running between them, a continuity of intention, I would say. They're seeking, I think, the two different conceptions are seeking to achieve the same goal. And that goal is that to pull the United States back from the Middle East. 3 presidents have been elected in a row from different parties, very different conceptions, who agree that we don't want to have another major war in the Middle East. We don't want large numbers of American troops on the ground in the Middle East. So we're going to pull back. That's going to create something of a vacuum. But we need to remain engaged in the region. I think if there's not a consensus, there's still a sense, there has been a sense among all of the last 3 presidents that we have to remain engaged to some extent. We don't want our enemies to completely fill the vacuum. And so how do we stabilize the region and pull back at the same time? And that's what these two different conceptions are meant to achieve. Stabilize the region while we pull back from it. The Republican answer is that Iran is the primary threat to the United States, to the U.S. order on the ground in the region. And Iran is working, if not necessarily in an alliance, at least in an alignment with China and Russia, with the intention of weakening the American order, expelling the United States eventually from the region, and weakening America's allies. So the Republican answer is we build up a coalition of allies on the ground. As we pull back, we build up our allies, and we create a coalition designed to achieve 2 major goals. First, to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, and number 2, to contain Iran on the ground, especially in places like Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. So multilateral containment, and then we saw in the Trump administration, combined with massive economic sanctions designed to contain, weaken, and then also prevent it from getting a nuclear weapon. The Democratic conception is based on a radically different understanding of Iran. These are 2 different concepts of what Iran is, and they are basically irreconcilable. The Republican assumption is that Iran is it has hegemonic aspirations. Yes, it's weak. I think every expert on Iran now recognizes that the regime has less support inside Iran than ever before. Its base of support is very narrow. Yet it still has, in the Republican conception, an aspiration to expel the United States, if not from the entire Middle East, at least from the Persian Gulf, and to weaken its allies. And it has developed techniques, I call it the Hezbollah model, of building up proxies on the ground and distributing to it precision-guided weaponry. Techniques that are very effective at undermining America and its allies in an asymmetric fashion. It is inveterately hostile to the United States and to its order. The democratic conception of Iran is radically different. Iran, in the democratic view, is a defensive power. The regime wants to stay in power in Iran, yes, and it's sitting on a volcano. It knows it's sitting on a volcano. It feels threatened by the United States and its allies because of the aggressive actions that the United States and its allies are habitually taking toward it. If the U.S. and its allies would offer a hand in not necessarily friendship, but at least in an effort to seek a diplomatic solution to the major conflicts between us, it would find a potential partner on the other side. If not a partner, an actor with whom it could reach accommodations that would serve the American interest. There is, in this view, a significant overlap in interests between the United States and the Iranians. For example, this is the democratic view, not my view. The United States and Iran share an interest in stabilizing Iraq. The Iranians are not especially interested in projecting power into Yemen. They have been drawn into Yemen because of unwise policies by especially America's ally, Saudi Arabia. They're not necessarily seeking to entrench themselves in Syria. We could find an accommodation with them if we work together with the Russians. If we negotiate with the Russians and with the Iranians about to limit the most threatening aspects of Iranian behavior in Syria, and so on and so forth. Basically, diplomatic engagement, if carried out in a way that does not threaten the regime in Tehran, could lead to all kinds of benefits. We share a hostility to supposedly radical Sunni extremism, groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. So all of this can be unlocked if we will engage Iran diplomatically. Now, the democratic view then says, well, what's the biggest impediment to unlocking the benefits of these shared interests? The conflict over the Iranian nuclear program. So if we can first come to an agreement on the nuclear program and put that off to one side, then we can unlock this larger potential for strategic accommodation with the Iranians. And of course, when it comes to the nuclear program, the Republican view says that Iran is hell-bent on acquiring a nuclear weapon. The evidence is overwhelming that this is what they want. Look at the price they have paid to keep a hold of this program. We can't actually solve that. Problem until we wrest the nuclear program from the talons of the regime. So those are the two conceptions. And I think it's very obvious, if you've followed what the Biden administration has done since it came in, that it is a complete believer in what I'm calling the democratic view. The democratic view was developed by Barack Obama and his team. Joe Biden has the same team, and he is seeking to complete what Obama started. And when you hear that phrase, complete what Obama started, the first thing you think is the JCPOA, the nuclear deal. He's seeking to go back to the nuclear deal. But actually, the concept is much larger. It's what I described to you, a strategic accommodation with Iran across the board. The goal is to stabilize the Middle East so the United States can pull back from it. And the problem is, in the democratic view, that America's allies, in particular the Israelis and the Saudis, are acting like a catapult that is throwing the United States at Iran. So what an appropriate strategy is to pull the United States away from its allies. First, cut a deal with Iran on the nuclear question, and then work with Iran to stabilize Yemen, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. Now, let me go through some components of this. I think our title hasn't hidden from anyone the fact that I am a complete believer in the Republican concept of how to do this, and a total disbeliever in all of the assumptions of the Democratic view. Let me start with the JCPOA and some misconceptions about it. Now, it's politically indefensible in the American domestic arena outside of the progressives. It's indefensible to say the United States and Iran share a lot of interests. We should be working to reach an accommodation with Iran, and our allies, Israel and Saudi Arabia, are the problem. Now, this is said in progressive circles, and I can point you to articles by senior officials in the Biden administration that either say it outright or make it clear that that's what they think without actually saying it. But you can't stand up in Congress and say that, and Joe Biden won't ever give a speech saying that. So the Biden administration has developed a rhetoric that says that the goal of their policy is to contain Iran. But when you actually follow what they're doing on the ground, or in particulars, you see that they're to contain Iran and to prevent it from getting a nuclear weapon. But when you actually see what they're doing, their policies cannot possibly achieve the goals that they are claiming to hold. So you either have to conclude that they are deluded and confused, or they're dishonest. Or perhaps disingenuous is a better word. And I think these are very smart people who are running the administration. Tony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, and so forth. The National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State. They know exactly what they're doing, and they know why they're saying the things that they're saying. And the first thing that they know is that the JCPOA will not stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. It's simply not possible. We don't need to go through all the reasons why that's the case. There are many, but the simplest way to make the point is that the JCPOA contains within it what we call the sunset clauses. The restrictions that the agreement places on the Iranian nuclear program, they evaporate over time. By 2031, they're all gone. All meaningful restrictions on the nuclear program end by 2031. Many of them end even before 2031. Some of them have already ended. You cannot possibly lift all the sanctions by 2031 and prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. By 2031, Iran will have a nuclear enrichment and reprocessing program of an industrial scale, and it will have an international legal stamp of approval for that program. So, as I say, I could go through many other aspects of the program, which show you of the JCPOA, which show you that it cannot possibly prevent them from having a nuclear weapon. But what it can do is what I suggested before. It can park the nuclear program, or it can park the controversy over the nuclear program off to one side, while also creating diplomatic channels with Iran in order to start this process of coming to a strategic accommodation with the Iranians over other parts of the region, which is the goal. The goal is to turn Iran into a partner of sorts for the United States, based on this understanding that there are these shared interests which the experts know exists, but we can't talk about publicly because it's politically unacceptable in the U.S. The other thing that this policy will not do is it will not contain Iran on the ground. It won't contain the militias that Iran is arming, training, and equipping with precision-guided weaponry that is becoming ever more sophisticated. And the proof of that is, again, in the JCPOA, because the JCPOA and the administration is openly dishonest about this, and I'll say dishonest and not disingenuous. The JCPOA lifts all sanctions on Iran, all meaningful sanctions on Iran. And so it gives Iran the financial resources, the economic resources, in order to build up its militias. And the administration wants to reduce the American military footprint further in the region, and it wants to do so and it's open about this, with diplomatic engagement of Iran. So the policy ends up being a legitimation of Iran's positions, the militia positions it has built up in Iraq, Yemen, and so forth. Again, you see this very clearly in the way the United States, the Biden administration, treated Saudi Arabia when it came into office. It immediately launched a campaign against a moral campaign against Saudi Arabia in general, but specifically with respect to Yemen, lifting the sanctions on the Houthis, who are the proxy of the Iranians in Yemen, and claiming that by doing so, we were going to create conditions that would allow us to solve the conflict in Yemen. And putting enormous pressure on Saudi Arabia to pull out of Yemen. So the policy amounts to a de facto recognition of the Iranian position in Yemen while delegitimating the Saudi the Saudi position in Yemen, and blaming the war and the humanitarian problems in Yemen entirely on the Saudis, without ever mentioning the Iranian role whatsoever. The administration has developed a whole rhetoric that avoids discussing Iran at all in the context of Yemen, and always talking in absolute moral terms about Yemen, how we need to stop the war, end the killing, and so forth, while blaming the Saudis. So what this amounts to, what this ends up being then, is a very significant realignment of the United States away from traditional allies and toward the Iranians. So we're kind of occupying a middle position now. No longer, the United States is no longer under the Biden administration, is no longer the leader of a coalition designed to contain Iran and its great power supporters, China and Russia. It's now taking up a middle position between its allies on the one hand and the Iranians on the other, recognizing the Iranian position in a number of key areas, while redefining the role of the U.S. support for allies as support for their sovereign territory. So we will give you resources to defend yourself against Iranian proxies when they attack you directly, but we will not support you when you go beyond your borders into places like Yemen or Syria to fight the Iranians. In the case of the Saudis, the Biden administration came down on them hard right at the beginning, and now you've already seen the shift in Saudi policy. There was a couple of months ago a very well publicized interview on Saudi television by Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, the de facto ruler, where he said, I'm starting a dialogue with Iran. I want to see a successful Iran. We have friendly feelings toward Iran, and so forth. These are not the deep-seated feelings that Mohammed bin Salman has in his heart toward Iran. This is a capitulation to the Biden administration by the Saudis. There's something similar going on in Israel today. Israel is in an analogous situation to Saudi Arabia, but its position is somewhat different because the United States cannot come directly at the Israelis with the kind of moral critique that it has come at that is directed at the Saudis, because Israel's popular among key constituencies, even within the Democratic Party. Israel is popular, and so the Biden administration has to come at Israel with more of a bank shot. But the change of government in Israel has made it easier for them to do that, and the Lapid, or Bennett Lapid, I say Lapid because I don't know how closely you're following all this, but former Prime Minister Netanyahu calls it the Lapid government, because the Prime Minister is Bennett, but Bennett is, in the eyes of Netanyahu, he's a right-wing traitor who's moved. He's now helped the left wing in Israel to come to power, and he's given the government a right-wing face. And so Netanyahu calls it the Lapid government instead of the Bennett government. So I find it funny. It's really funny. It's a really funny joke. Anyway, I fall into the habit of calling it the Lapid government myself. The Bennett government is saying that now that the Netanyahu government got too close to the Republicans in Washington, made Israel a political football in American politics, and was unable to influence the American policy toward Iran because it had so identified with the Republicans. But now Lapid, who's the foreign minister, and Bennett, they're going to be able to have more influence on the Biden administration because they're not going to be as hostile to the administration's Iran policy, and they're going to find those areas of overlap between the Israeli interest and the American interest, and very much taking at face value the statements of the Biden administration when it says it's going to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, and it's going to contain Iran on the ground. But the administration is never going to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, for the reasons I said, because of the sunset agreements. The Biden administration says, no, we're going to get a longer and stronger agreement. So first we're going to go back to the JCPOA, and then we're going to negotiate with the Iranians for a longer and stronger agreement. That's like me telling you, you put your house up for sale at $500,000, and I buy your house and we close the deal, and then I say, now I want to negotiate with you further. No, I'm saying I did it wrong, didn't I? You come and buy my house for $500,000, and you buy it, we end the sale, and then I come to you and I say, no, actually I want to negotiate some more, and I want you to pay me another $500,000. And you'll say, no, I've already done the deal. Why should I do that? That's basically what longer and stronger means, because the JCPOA hands the Iranians everything they want and gives it to them with an international seal of approval, ends all sanctions permanently. There's no way to go to the Iranians after you've done that and say, okay, let's negotiate a longer and stronger agreement where you will accept new restrictions on your nuclear program. It's simply a slogan that the Biden administration is flashing in the eyes of people who either are not following closely or who are not willing to admit what they're really up to. Unfortunately, in the case of Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia, I think he understands this perfectly, and he's saying that we love Iran, we want to see a successful Iran, and so on, because it's the price of maintaining decent relations with Washington. But he knows it's a lot of bunk. In the case of the Israeli left that's taken over, I'm not actually convinced that they understand the nonsense that they're speaking. And that's because they, as happened in our politics, where everything became about Donald Trump. So every problem, your position on everything had to do with your position on Trump. The same kind of thing happened in Israel over Netanyahu. And so if there's a problem in U.S.-Israeli relations, a disagreement, well, then it's because of Netanyahu. So now that Netanyahu's gone, we can get over this problem with the Americans. But the Israeli position and the Biden position, there's an inherent friction, contradiction between them. And I don't think that they ultimately are going to be able to settle this. They may think they have for a while, but this is going to be a recurring problem because the Iranians are right on the Israeli border in Syria. They're building their militias there. They're transferring to the militias precision-guided weaponry, which the Israelis understand is directed at them. They're going to take actions to do something about that. There's no way the Biden administration can make that go away simply by saying nice things about Iran. Similarly, I think the Israeli elite, the security establishment, understands what a threat to Israel the Iranian nuclear program is. And over time, it's going to see clearly that there is no longer and stronger agreement. So that friction between Israel and the Biden administration is going to reemerge, and it's going to be significant. It's something for us to watch. I'll just say a couple more words about the U.S.-Iranian relations specifically, and then we can open it up for wider discussion. I think that we are similarly going to see increased friction between the Biden administration and Iran over time. Simply because I believe, as I said at the outset, that my view, that is the Republican view of Iran, is the correct view. I do think it is hell-bent on domination of the entire Middle East. I think it is hell-bent on a nuclear weapon, and I think it is hell-bent on undermining America's allies in the region. Now, we may see moments when it appears that that's not the case. For example, you might say to me right now, well, why is it that we haven't seen greater friction between the United States and the Iranian proxies in Iraq? There's been some friction, yes, but how come there isn't greater friction? And I would say that it's just a question of the moment right now with the negotiations over the nuclear question. The U.S. and Iran may come to an agreement about the JCPOA, or they may not. They may come to an interim agreement, and there'll be a little bit of good feeling for a few months, but then some of these old tensions are going to reemerge. I just don't think this accommodation that they believe is out there is going to actually manifest itself. And the administration is going to have to come up with answers to the problems that arise. It's going to have to come up with answers to the problems that the direct threat to Saudi Arabia that Iran represents from Yemen and from other areas, and it's going to have to come up with answers to the growing cooperation between China and Iran and between Russia and Iran. This is another area where I think that they have completely misread the map. Secretary of State Blinken said when he was in Anchorage meeting with his Chinese counterpart that Chinese interests in Iran and American interests in Iran are virtually the same. I think this is completely false. I think China is surreptitiously working to help build up Iran in order to support it against the United States, and also in order to exploit the tensions that the United States has created with its ally Saudi Arabia. Increasingly, if you're Saudi Arabia and you see Iran growing in strength, you realize that the only party who can help you on the world stage is China, or one of the major parties who can help you is China and not the United States. The Chinese understand this, that they build up Iran over here and they push Saudi Arabia toward them in this direction. These problems, whether the administration has the proper conception in which to analyze these problems or not, the problems are not going to go away. And there's going to be friction with Iran directly. There's going to be friction between the United States and its allies. The administration may not ever come around to a complete understanding of why that is the case. but it will not be able to sort of move on to this new stage of accommodation with Iran, and that would accommodation with Iran that would allow it to pull back from the Middle East as it wants to. One last point here, and that is to what Matt alluded in the introduction. Even as it sees that its concepts don't fit reality, I don't think the administration can adjust the concepts, because the concepts are as much domestic political concepts as they are foreign policy concepts. And this is one of the things I think we need to focus on much more intently. The story the administration is telling itself and telling its, especially its progressive base, about the problems of the Middle East is one that is tailor-made to appeal to progressives. It says that the conflict that we're having with Iran is the result of our ally Israel. Our ally Israel's aggressive attitude toward Iran is propelling us into a conflict that is against our own interests. This plays extremely well in a progressive to a progressive base which doesn't like Israel and which has always resented the close relationship between the United States and Israel. But not just Israel, also Saudi Arabia. So those actors on the stage in the Middle East, that's Benjamin Netanyahu and Mohammed bin Salman, who are actors whom the progressives are already predisposed to hate, to the progressives, this policy gives the progressives new reasons to hate the people they hated already. And it turns America and, not just the people on the international stage, but also the domestic constituents for the Republican foreign policy, whom the progressives revile, they are also seen as part of the problem. So evangelicals, neoconservative Republicans, or just Republicans who want a muscular foreign policy, or Republicans in general, their warmongering, in concert with the warmongering of Netanyahu and Mohammed bin Salman, they're the ones that have caused the problems in the Middle East and not the Iranians. So it sets up this cosmology where America and its allies are the party of war, or the Republicans, I should say, pardon me, the Republicans and America's traditional allies are the party of war. And Iran is the party, not so much of peace, but the object of diplomacy. So it's in the diplomacy camp, and America's traditional allies are in the war camp. And this is tailor-made for a progressive audience. And it's that domestic political context, the progressive context of this policy, that's going to make it very hard for the administration to actually develop more healthy concepts that will allow it to read what's actually going on the ground. So I think we're in for a lot of friction, and it's our job. I say our job because I'm just assuming, perhaps incorrectly, that you're all largely in agreement with me. I don't know. But for those of you who are in agreement with me, it's our job to watch as these frictions develop and continue, and to point out to the American electorate in general what's going on and why the administration isn't handling it correctly. Thank you. Should I field the questions then?
We've got some time for questions, but you have to wait for the microphone because we're recording it. So 2 microphones roaming around here. Just raise your hand in between questions if you want to ask one.
Having read your book on Ike, it seems like in some ways...
I did not plant this gentleman.
It seems like in some ways we're just repeating history as sort of a long-term, unreliable, and inept ally.
So this gentleman, I have no idea who he is, but he is now one of my favorite people. I wrote a book on Eisenhower, which is available at bookstores everywhere, Amazon. And it told the story. I actually I wrote it during the Obama administration, and I started writing it really just as a history, but as I was writing it, I realized that it was a historical argument that resonated with contemporary events. I tried not to push that too hard, actually, because I thought if I turned it into into a policy, a contemporary policy argument, I would do damage to what I thought was a serious historical argument. So I kind of just hinted at it at the end. But I do think it's the same thing. The story I told there, without boring all of you, well, it won't bore you. It's a scintillating read, actually. So that I don't ruin the book for you, I'll just say very quickly. Eisenhower tried to stabilize the Middle East in the 1950s by distancing the United States from Israel and Britain at the time, and tried to turn Nasser of Egypt, who was the Soviet Union's ally, into the partner of the United States. Eisenhower, who was an extremely intelligent and experienced guy in foreign policy, unlike Barack Obama, he was handed this strategy by the Middle East experts. He tried it. He recognized it didn't work, and he shifted his concepts. That's what I argue in the book. He wasn't saddled by any of the. Eisenhower was a realist through and through, and he tried things, and when they didn't work, he went on to new ideas. He wasn't an ideologue, which is what I think the people ruling this country now are, and I think they have slotted the Iran question into their ideology. But they're drawing on. They are drawing on undercurrents in our culture, which have been there for a long time. There is a. I won't go on and on about this, but the key issue is Israel, and there has been a current in our culture for the last 150 years, if not longer, where some people in our culture see Israel and the Jews as, if not natural allies, actually kind of extensions of America. And then there are the people who see them as the opposite. And so if I could, and that has, the political groupings that have associated themselves with the Israel is an asset to America, as opposed to there's a group that sees Israel as a liability. The political groupings have shifted over time. When in Eisenhower's day, it was Rockefeller Republicans who saw Israel as the great liability, and Republicans in general were much more wary of Israel than were Democrats. Over time, that cultural current has shifted, and it's now associated with the progressives more than any other group. Although you still have some establishment Republican types that especially some of the older people who kind of grew up in that Rockefeller Republicanism, who have that view. That's why it's not clearly the Republican or the Democratic view. I think this is a fascinating subject, and I've actually written some other things about it. If you don't mind me being self-referential, there's an article I wrote in First Things magazine called, I don't remember what it's called. If you go in First Things and you put Doran in there, something like the theology of American foreign policy. I discussed this in there. Thank you for raising that.
Yes, sir. My name is Cammy, but I'm with the Pakistani Spectator. And my question is, would you call Obama and Trump both successful in their foreign policies toward Middle East? Because despite Bibi Netanyahu's best effort to push America against Iran and start some kind of trouble with Iran, both of them were very successful not to have serious armed conflict with Iran. And about your Republican versus Democrat, being a Sunni Muslim, I shouldn't say this, but this is fact, historical fact, that while Sunni Muslims have been crazy, they've been fighting war from the beginning with Jews, with Christian, right and left. But given that Iran never attacked any country, don't you think that both, again, Trump and Obama were realistic that instead of fighting with Iran and attacking them, we should try to bring closer to America, because it's given that Iranians are a lot more cultured than Middle Eastern, even though they are Muslim, but their Muslim identity is not as strong as their Iranian or Persian identity. So to me, it's best for America to reconcile their difference with Iran rather than, going to Bibi Netanyahu's policy and attacking Iran. So what do you think about this approach, making some peace with Iran rather than, attacking them or...
So you and I are in different schools of thought on this. I think that Obama's policy toward Iran was very unsuccessful because I think he basically handed Iran a pathway to a nuclear weapon. And I think that Iran, I don't agree with you when you say Iran has never attacked another country. That's a Iranian line of, it's a line of Iranian propaganda, which has a kind of surface truth to it because Iran has a very weak regular army. But Iran has the Revolutionary Guards, and it reaches into neighboring countries, and it builds up these militias, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and any number of different militias in Iraq and Syria, and the Houthis in Yemen. And I would put, in Syria, 500,000 people have been killed, over 10 million have been driven from their homes. Could be even larger numbers than that. I would blame Iran first and foremost for that. I mean, the Iranian method of fighting the adversaries of the Assad regime is the Iranian-Russian method of fighting adversaries of the Assad regime is to drop barrel bombs on civilians who are going to bakeries and to drop barrel bombs on hospitals. So I think that the amount of just horrendous killing that has been done in Syria is largely the result of the Iranians. And so when I hear you say they have never attacked anyone, I don't see it as true at all. I think Trump's policy toward Iran was not completely successful, but I think it pointed the direction towards success. Maximum pressure, that is, massive economic sanctions, combined with clandestine, covert efforts to sabotage the nuclear program, carried out primarily by the Israelis, I suspect. Maybe the Americans had a hand in it too, who knows. Combined with efforts to support allies to stop Iranian forces on the ground, was not completely successful, but it was only in place in that form, in all of those things combined, for about 18 months. So if we had another, we shut down, we the United States, basically shut down the Iranian economy. And the Obama administration told us that if we did that, if we took such actions, there would be war. And not just war, it would be war like George W. Bush's invasion of Iraq. That was totally disproved by Donald Trump. So I agree with you. Trump was successful in that he avoided war with Iran, and at the same time, he degraded Iranian capabilities significantly. I wish he had had 4 more years to degrade them even more. The Iranians are very good. The Islamic Republic of Iran is like a puffer fish. It's not that dangerous, but it's able to make itself look very fearsome. And it has developed certain techniques, like with the Revolutionary Guard, of building up these militias and so forth, that make it look stronger than it is. Donald Trump killed Qasem Soleimani. That's the #2 guy in the Iranian regime. On the org chart, he's not #2, but he was actually the second most powerful person in Iran. Iran couldn't do anything about it. Yes, they made a show of fighting back against us, but really they were deterred militarily. Donald Trump shut down their oil exports, basically brought the country's economy to a grinding halt. They couldn't do a thing about it because Donald Trump understood it's actually a relatively weak third world country. It's not, in Middle Eastern terms, it's a very significant country, 80 million people, it's stable and so on, but the United States is a superpower. And so he understood the basic power differential, and he set up a policy that allowed us to put pressure on it, a policy that disproved all of the claims of the Obama administration about it. So I think that was the way to go. The Obama administration, the Biden administration has come back, and it's repeating all of the claims that the Obama administration made in 2015, as if we didn't have this example in front of us. And I've already gone on a rant here. I'll just add one more thing. Trump also added another element here, which was the Abraham Accords, and he showed that you could move forward in Israeli-Arab peace in ways other than going through the Palestinian-Israeli bilateral negotiations, that was a step toward Saudi-Israeli, if not peace, at least understanding. That's very valuable for relations between the United States and the Muslim world, Jews in the Muslim world, the United States in the Muslim world, the West and the Muslim world. And the Biden administration has turned its back on that, and it's building up Iran, which is rapacious abroad, the Iranian regime, which is rapacious abroad and completely illegitimate at home, except the legitimacy it gets through threatening people with death. So it makes no sense to me whatsoever.
We got time for just a couple more, and then we'll have a reception. You can ask some other questions, but back here.
Eric Bordenkircher, UCLA. Mike, what do you think the play for the Biden administration should be if these negotiations in Vienna fall apart, or the Iranians decide they don't want to get back into the agreement? And just another thing too, and I've been very surprised about this, and the Biden administration has been rather mum about it, is this issue of nuclear proliferation in the region, and that the Saudis are quite intent on pursuing that agenda if the Iranians do get the bomb, which I think would further destabilize the region.
So thanks. Hello, Eric. I know Eric from Twitter. I've never met him in person. With regard to your second question or your comment, the U.S. policy before Obama was to deny countries the complete fuel cycle. That was our non-proliferation policy. And it was just assumed by the entire non-proliferation community that if Iran got the complete fuel cycle, which the JCPOA hands it, that would lead to a cascade of proliferation in the region. I see no reason to doubt that thinking. That was just the assumption of everyone prior to Obama. It's widely assumed, and correctly or incorrectly, I don't know, but widely assumed that Saudi Arabia has a nuclear weapon in escrow in Pakistan, and the minute that it has played a role in financing the Pakistani nuclear program, and that the minute Iran gets a bomb, Saudi Arabia will import one from Pakistan. The Turks are similar to Japan in that they have a modern industrial economy and all of the capability they need. You're sort of one turn of the key away from developing their own nuclear weapon. I don't know. I'm not an expert on these questions. I don't know how true that is. Are the Turks, once they make the decision, are they 1 year from a nuclear bomb, or is it 5 years? Whatever it is, given the nature of their economy, their scientific community, and their national capabilities, I'm sure it's not very long. And so the minute the Iranians get a bomb, the Saudis will get one, the Turks will get one, the Egyptians will want one. And then we'll have a multilateral nuclear standoff in the Middle East, which is a very ugly thought to think about. Eric, I forgot what your first question was.
What's the Biden administration's play here?
What they're going to do? They may not get a return to the JCPOA. They thought that when they came into power and they turned to the Iranians and said, let's go back to the JCPOA, they thought the Iranians would be crazy not to do it and that we'd be there in a flash. But the Iranians, being Iranians, they're very good at negotiating, and they sensed the deep desire of the Biden administration to return to the JCPOA. So they said, no. Like a blushing bride. No, I don't. Whether it's just pure theater or negotiation to see how much concessions they can wrench from the Americans, or whether they have made a strategic decision not to go back to the JCPOA, I do not know. The Biden play, what its play should be, would be to go to Trump maximum pressure. It won't do that for all the reasons I said. What it will do is it will develop a JCPOA process, like the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. The Democrats are very good at this. Whenever there's an intractable problem, a problem that can't be solved, you set up a process and then you have lots of discussions about it. So what they'll do is they'll come to some kind of shaky arrangement with the Iranians where, okay, we recognize that you're going to keep, the Iranians are insisting to keep certain advanced centrifuges that are not permitted by the JCPOA. So the Biden administration will say with a wink and a nod, okay, you can continue to run those advanced centrifuges, but keep your stockpiles at this level, and then we will lift sanctions sort of kind of on these entities, and it'll be this hazy understanding that none of us can quite that is understood among the people who are doing the negotiations, and those of us outside don't really understand. And when we do understand and we say, aha, this is what you've done, they'll say, no, we're not doing that. What are you talking about? We're trying to contain them. And they'll turn the fact that they have not gotten an agreement with the Iranians into a sign that they're actually being really tough with the Iranians, but they're not.
Okay, we got time for one more.
Hi, Mr. Hi, Mr. Doran. My name is Rania Kaiser. I'm from Syria, and I just came back from Idlib about 2 years ago. I keep on seeing a flip-flop strategy from the American administration.
Sabotage. Just speak up.
Okay. I keep on seeing a flip-flop strategy from the American administration towards the Syrian situation. And the people that are paying the price for this are the 4 million people that are now living in tents, staying awake until the morning so they can pick spiders off their children before they get bitten. And I keep on seeing Iran expanding and moving forward and making advances and making plans to stay in Syria, whereas it's supposed to be leaving Syria, and Russia is supposed to be leaving Syria. And what I'm seeing is that the Biden administration is using us, the Syrian people, as a negotiation tool. So in the name of my people, what should we do?
Well, I sympathize. I don't know that I can answer for you in the name of your people. I do think it is a sad fact that the United States in general has never really had a Syria policy. And I would say that was true even when I was responsible for Syria in the White House. I hate to admit that. It's always been our Syria policy has always been a function of our Iran policy. So we're more inclined. Well, there's always a hesitancy to get involved in Syria, even when it wasn't military involvement, like when I was in the White House, which was 2005 to 7. But we're more inclined to contain Assad and to contain the Iranians and the Russians in Syria when we have a strong Iran containment policy, and when we don't, when we have an Iran accommodation policy, then it's accommodate them in Syria. I mean, I assume you know this really quite well, and I don't have a good answer for you except that we should have a strong containment policy. Sorry, I can't solve the problem for you.
Please join me in thanking Dr. Doran.
Thank you.